Dust lifted off the road like smoke, and the wagon's wheels shrieked as iron rims scraped stone. Folks leaned from porches and door frames, boots propped, spit pooling dark on the dirt. Heat pressed heavy, the kind that made men shift slow and horses twitch mean. Elias Ward stood with his hat in hand at the far end of the street, shoulders broad but bent with silence, eyes fixed on that wagon like a man waiting on judgment. The driver cracked his whip and the horses snorted, lather dripping white against their chests. The creak of the wood sang louder than talk, though whispers carried sharp as spurs. That's the ghost rancher. He sent for a bride. Laughter simmered in throats, careful not to carry too far, for the memory of his gun hand still lingered like a rattler under brush. The wagon stopped. The horses stomped at flies. The door opened with a long groan, and every gaze clung to it. A boot hit the ground first, then another. Not dainty steps in satin slippers, not a girl in gingham like the stories promised. No, this shadow stretched high across the dust. She ducked as she stepped down, and when she rose, heads tipped back as though watching thunderheads climb the horizon. Twice his height, broad as the barn doors Elias had patched 100 times, she stood wrapped in plain clothes. Her dress carried no frill, no trim. Her arms, bare to the sun, were roped with scars and strength. Dark hair fell in a heavy braid, and her eyes, storm gray, unblinking, cut through the street like the edge of a whetted blade. The silence broke into snickers. A boy hooted. A woman gasped. Elias didn't move. Not a flinch, not a twitch. His jaw worked slow, his thumb worrying the rim of his hat. The town waited for him to laugh, to curse, to turn his back on the mistake the wagon had brought him. But the rancher only stepped forward. Boot heels struck the dust. The crowd hushed, not out of respect, but hunger for spectacle. Elias reached her side. The top of his head barely brushed her shoulder, yet he didn't falter. His eyes climbed, met hers, and held. Her voice came low, steady, without apology. "Name's Maeve." That was all. Elias nodded once. Hat back on his head, he offered his hand. She took it, her grip swallowing his, firm as oak roots. The driver climbed back to his seat, whip snapping, and the wagon rattled away. Folks leaned into one another, trading whispers sharp as knives. "She ain't no bride, she's a giant." "Lord, what's he doing talking her in?" That ranch was cursed already. Elias never answered them. He turned, leading her toward the end of the street where the land stretched bare and cruel. Maeve walked beside him, her stride long, measured, every step shaking the boards of the walkway. Men shrank back into doorways as she passed, though her gaze never strayed from the road ahead. The town behind them hummed with laughter again, rising as they left earshot. But the sound did not reach Elias's face. He carried no expression but the same iron calm that had held when bullets once flew. At the edge of town, where the dry grass swayed brittle in the wind, Elias paused. The sun sagged low, bleeding orange over the mesas. He studied her again, the way her shadow stretched across the plain like a watchtower, the way her chest rose and fell steady as if she had walked out of storms far worse than heat and whispers. For the first time in years, something moved beneath his ribs. Not comfort, not fear, something heavier, like the earth itself shifting. Maeve's eyes caught the horizon, scanning, waiting. The silence between them was not empty. It was taut, humming with words neither had offered yet. He cleared his throat, rough as gravel. Long road. Her mouth pulled the faintest curl, not quite smile, not quite scorn. Long enough. That was all she gave, and all he asked. Together they stepped into the fading light, toward the lonely spread of land where coyotes would soon sing and fences leaned tired against the wind. Behind them, the town's laughter carried thin, brittle, and far away. Ahead, the ranch waited, brittle grass whispering secrets neither had spoken yet. The storyteller's voice lingers, soft as fire crackle. And so it was folks. The rancher who buried his guns waited for a bride, and the wagon brought him a woman carved from storms instead. The town thought it a jest, a tale to drink over. But out there, past the dry fences and the red dust, a story had begun, the kind that don't die easy. The fence post snapped under her grip like dry bone. Elias stood 3 paces back, hammer idle in his hand, watching as Maeve drove the splintered timber deep into the earth with one strike of her boot. Dust puffed, the post stood firm, and the prairie wind caught the loose strands of her braid, whipping them across her scarred shoulder. "Hold," she said, and Elias dropped the hammer into her palm. She swung once, twice, and the nail buried, so clean it shone silver in the sun. By sundown, the whole line was fixed. Elias wiped sweat from his brow and leaned against the rail. Maeve straightened without panting, eyes narrowed to the horizon, as if she were counting miles no man could see. The ranch grew quieter with her on it. Coyotes still sang, cattle still moaned low in the night, but something in the air carried different weight. When Elias stepped from the porch at dawn, Maeve was already at the corral, hand on the wild mustang that had thrown every ranch hand who ever tried him. She whispered low, her voice a hum, and the horse stood still as stone. By the third morning, she swung onto his back. No saddle, no rope. He bucked once, twice, then broke under her like a colt at weaning. From the ridge, a rider watched, eyes glinting mean beneath the brim of a black hat. Elias saw him in the distance, but when he reached for his rifle, Maeve shook her head. Not today. That night, the tavern spilled with laughter. Where the rancher's giant bride filled mugs with ale and loosened tongues. Men slapped the tables, women shook their heads, and bets were placed on how long she'd last before vanishing back east. But when Maeve walked past the saloon doors, silence spread like oil on water. The tallest men leaned back, and even the drunkest kept their joke swallowed. Her eyes didn't touch them. She kept to the boardwalk, each step heavy, steady, like the drumbeat of war. She ate in silence, worked in silence, slept with her back to the window and her face toward the door. But Elias noticed. Sometimes in the half-light before dawn, she sat at the table sharpening the edge of an axe not meant for wood. Her hands bore scars that told more than labor, slashes, burns, bites of steel. And then came the raid. A lowing rose from the south field, panicked and sharp. Elias reached the porch in seconds, rifle clutched, boots sliding across the dry dirt. Cattle scattered under the moonlight. Figures on horseback wove among them, ropes snapping, laughter cold as creek water. The Kincaid brothers. Everyone knew their name, spat it, feared it. Elias pulled the rifle to his shoulder. But before he fired, Maeve moved. Barefoot, night dress whipping at her legs, she strode into the field. The rustlers reined up, torches flaring, and one called down, voice thick with mockery. "Look at here, boys. Rancher's got himself a mountain." Laughter rippled. A rope whistled through the air toward her. Maeve caught it mid-swing. With one yank, the rider tumbled clean from the saddle, hitting the ground with a thud that hushed the others. Her voice carried flat, calm, cutting through the dark. "Off my land." The horses shifted, uneasy. One brother spat, grinning with yellow teeth. "You think we scare easy, woman?" Maeve took one step closer. Torchlight licked across her face, revealing scars deep as river cuts. Her shadow towered across the herd, stretching long and crooked over the grass. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't reach for steel. She only looked at them, eyes storm gray, unblinking. And for the first time in a long while, the Kincaid gang pulled their reins and backed away, muttering, cursing, but backing all the same. When they were gone, Elias lowered his rifle, heart drumming in his chest. Maeve turned, rope still clutched at her fist, eyes softening for a breath before she tossed it aside. She walked past him without a word, only the crunch of her steps in the dust. Inside, the lantern flickered. Elias sat at the table, staring at the wood grain, listening to the quiet. Maeve settled in her chair across from him, her frame filling the room like a mountain fills a valley. She reached for the whetstone, began sharpening the axe again, each scrape steady, unhurried. Outside, the cattle calmed. The wind whistled against the shutters. Elias swallowed, voice rough. "They'll be back." Maeve didn't look up. "I know." He studied her hands, the way they moved, sure and scarred, as though every mark had its own tale. He wanted to ask, where she'd learned to stare men down like wolves, why her eyes searched the horizon even in peace, but the words sat heavy in his chest. The whetstone sang on steel. Finally, she spoke, quiet enough he leaned forward to catch it. "You put your guns in the ground. Thought you buried it all. But trouble don't stay buried. Trouble hunts." Her gaze lifted then, meeting his. In a lantern light, Elias saw the storm she carried. a storm older and wider than the plains. The storyteller's voice slips in, slow, heavy, certain. Now, folks said Maeve weren't natural, that no woman walked this earth so tall or so fierce. Some swore she was cursed, others swore she was sent. But Elias Ward, he didn't ask. He just knew the ground had shifted and the sky was darkening. Flames clawed at the night sky. The neighbor's ranch lit up like a funeral pyre, cattle screaming as they scattered wild through the sage. Gunfire cracked, each shot snapping sharp against the silence of the plains. Elias stood at the fence line, rifle in hand, watching the orange glow swell. Maeve was already saddling the Mustang. Her braids swung heavy down her back as she pulled the cinch tight. Sparks carried on the wind, and the smell of burning flesh curled low in Elias's throat. "They'll come here next," he muttered. Maeve's answer was the scrape of steel. She lifted the axe from where it leaned against the barn, the blade polished sharp from nights on the whetstone. By morning, the ash was still drifting. A boy's body had been found near the creek, his father's hands stiff where they'd clutched a pitchfork too late. The town gathered in the street, faces pale, mouths tight. The Kincaid's horses had carved tracks deep into the dirt, mocking any notion of safety. Elias stood at the edge of the crowd, Maeve beside him like a tower. A woman sobbed into her shawl. A man spat and cursed, swearing the sheriff was no better than a scarecrow nailed in the wind. The sheriff said nothing. His eyes slid away from Maeve's as she stared, steady, silent. When a meeting broke, Elias and Maeve rode home alone. No laughter followed them this time. Only the whisper of boots dragging slow on boards, and doors closing quick when they passed. That night, Elias dug. The pecan tree groaned under the shovel's bite as he unearthed the iron box. His hands shook when he pried it open, the hinges stiff with rust. Inside, wrapped in oilskin, lay the Colt revolvers he had sworn never to touch again. The grips were worn smooth by years of killing. Maeve stood over him, lantern light catching the scars across her arms. Her voice was low. "You'll need them." Elias looked up, jaw clenched. "I buried them so I could breathe." "Breathing don't stop bullets," she said, and turned away. He sat there in the dirt, staring at the pistols. His chest felt hollow, like the earth had opened inside him. The attack came 2 nights later. Horses thundered in from the ridge, shadows cutting across the moonlight. Torches flared, and shouts tore through the dark. "Burn it! Burn the bastard out!" The barn went first, flames licking high as the roof groaned, cattle bawling inside. Elias ran for the door, but Maeve caught his arm. Her grip was iron. "Too late," she said. The fire burst through the rafters with a scream of sparks. Elias staggered back, rifle raised as the first rider tore across the yard. He fired, the shot slamming the man from the saddle. The horse bolted, dragging dust behind it. Another rider rushed, but Maeve stepped forward, swinging the axe. The blade caught the torch clean, splintering wood and scattering fire into the dirt. The rider swerved, spurred hard, and missed her by inches. Bullets hissed past the porch. Elias dropped behind the trough, firing steady, measured. 2 more went down, but the gang was thick, circling, howling like wolves. Maeve strode into the yard, axe glinting red in the blaze. A rope snaked toward her again, but this time she seized it with both hands, yanking the rider clear off his mount. The man hit the ground, wind crushed from his lungs. She swung once, and he didn't rise again. The Kincaid leader's voice rose above the chaos. "Take the land. Leave no one standing." Maeve's eyes locked on him, cold as river ice. She pushed through the smoke, each stride deliberate. A rider tried to cut her off. She caught his rifle in her free hand, twisted, and the wood snapped like a twig. She shoved him down into the dirt, horse rearing, and moved on. Elias kept firing, his pistol spitting flame now, both hands steady. The years had not dulled his aim. Men fell, horses screamed, and still the gang pressed. Maeve reached the leader at last. His horse reared, torchlight painting his face in wild orange. He sneered down at her, pistol raised. "Should have stayed in the shadows, freak," he spat. Her voice was low, carried in the crackle of fire. "You don't scare me." The pistol shook. For the first time, the sneer faltered. She stepped closer, eyes never leaving his, until the muzzle quivered inches from her brow. She leaned in, whispering something lost under the roar of flames. The leader's face drained white. His hand dropped, pistol slack. Without another word, he yanked the reins and fled, spurring his horse into the dark. The gang faltered. Some tried to fight on, but Maeve's shadow stretched long across the firelight, axe dripping, eyes unblinking. One by one, they broke, turning tail into the night. Silence fell hard. The barn burned low, its timbers collapsing with a groan. Smoke rolled thick, stinging eyes, coating throats. Elias leaned against the trough, chest heaving, revolvers heavy in his hands. Maeve stood in the center of the yard, unmoving, the flames casting her as tall as the sky. Her braid swung loose, ash settling across her shoulders. The cattle bawled. The Mustang screamed from the corral. Elias staggered toward her, voice rasping. "What did you tell him?" She didn't answer. She only dropped the axe into the dirt, the blade sinking deep, and walked past him into the smoke. From the town, lights were already sparking. Neighbors would come running soon, but they'd find only ruins and whispers. The storyteller's voice lingers, grave as a hymn. That night, folks saw the ranch burn, and they saw Maeve stand tall in the firelight. Some swore she was no woman at all, but something older, something the plains had birthed to balance out the wicked. Whatever she was, the Kincaids learned fear, and the town learned silence. Boots thudded on dry boards, spurs jangling like chains. The main street was lined with rifles, hard eyes peering out from windows and porches. Dust swirled in the air, stirred by the hooves of a dozen hired guns crowding behind the Kincaid leader. Their faces were shadows beneath wide brims, their horses stamping, eager and mean. The church bell tolled once, slow, heavy. Maeve walked first, Elias beside her. Together they stepped out from the far end of town, boots sinking deep into powder dust. The people who had once mocked now stood silent, every breath held, watching. The rancher scarred and bent with years, the woman towering like a storm cloud. Side by side they came, and the street felt smaller for it. The Kincaid leader spat into the dirt. "Should have burned you both to ash when I had chance." His voice carried sharp, but his pistol hand twitched, betraying him. Elias's coat brushed the butt of his Colt. His eyes were steady, hard as iron, but he said nothing. Maeve stepped forward until her shadow stretched long over the horses. The leader laughed, though it cracked thin. "You think you're some kind of monster? You ain't. You're just flesh. Flesh tears." The crowd hushed deeper. A tumbleweed skittered across the street, bouncing against a trough before breaking apart. Maeve's voice came low, even. "Flesh tears. But mine never broke." Her braids swung as the wind kicked up, ash still clinging from the burned ranch. She unbuttoned the sleeve at her wrist and pulled it back. Scars shone pale under the sun, slashes, burns, bullet tracks, marked so thick it was hard to tell skin from story. Gasps spread through the crowd. The leader sneered, louder now, trying to hold the fear choking him. "What are you?" Maeve's eyes never blinked. "What your kind made me." The words hit like iron. She rolled her sleeve back down, set her shoulders, and raised the axe. The steel caught the sun, gleaming bright enough to blind. The street cracked open with gunfire. Elias moved first, both Colts drawn, spitting flame. He walked into the storm as if the years had never passed, each shot finding its mark. Men toppled from saddles, rifles clattering into the dust. Bullets tore the air around him, but Elias's stride was steady, sure, unbroken. Maeve was thunder. She crashed into the riders, axe splitting wood, steel, and bone alike. Horses reared, screaming. Men cried out. She caught a rifle barrel in one hand, shoved it back, and the shot blew wild into the sky. With a swing of her arm, she hurled the gunman into the trough, water splashing crimson. The leader tried to ride through the chaos, firing wild, shouting curses drowned by screams. Maeve turned to him, eyes locked, axe raised high. He spurred his horse hard, charging, pistol aimed at her chest. Elias fired once, his bullet striking the pistol clean from the leader's hand. The gun spun into the dirt. The horse faltered, screaming. Maeve stepped into its path, caught the bridle, and wrenched the beast aside. The leader tumbled down, hitting the street in a spray of dust. He scrambled, dirt streaking his face, eyes wide. Maeve stood over him, axe poised. The crowd held its breath. "No," he begged, voice cracking. "No, you ain't human." Her shadow swallowed him whole. She leaned down, her voice low enough only he heard. Whatever she said froze him stiff, his mouth hanging open like a man staring death in the eye. She raised the axe and dropped it into the dirt beside his head. The blade quivered deep, inches from his skull. "Run," she said. He scrambled up, tripping, clawing at the ground, before bolting down the street like a whipped dog. His hired guns scattered with him, fleeing past the edge of town, leaving only silence and smoke behind. Maeve straightened. The townsfolk's eyes followed her every movement. Some crossed themselves, others bowed their heads. Elias slid his Colts back into their holsters, his chest heaving, but his face unreadable. The silence broke with the creak of the church bell, swinging once more. Maeve turned, her eyes sweeping the crowd. "No more," she said simply. "Not here. Not again." Elias stepped to her side. Together they walked down the street, boots crunching in dust, leaving the axe buried deep in the earth where all could see it. No one moved until they had vanished past the last house, their figures small against the wide horizon. The storyteller's voice carries soft, low, like a hymn carried on wind. And so the town that once laughed fell quiet. They say Elias Ward found his breath again in that fight. And Maeve, well, Maeve became more than woman. Some said she was born of giants, others that the wars of the old country had carved her in blood and sorrow. But those who were there, they knew. She was the storm the plains had needed, and the shadow that never bent. They say her axe stayed in that street for years, rusted into the ground, a marker folk dared not pass. And if you ride through at dusk, when the light runs red, they'll tell you can still see her, tall as a cottonwood, walking beside the loner rancher who waited for a bride and got a legend instead.